Alberta formally pitched a new oil pipeline to the west coast of British Columbia last week. The proposed pipeline would run along the existing Trans Mountain pipeline and send more than 1 million barrels to Asian markets every day. That, according to Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. Power and Politics spoke with Minister of Energy and Natural Resources Tim Hodgson about the project that he says is a good investment for Canadian taxpayers.
We're going to grow our way to net zero, not shrink our way to net zero. And telling Canadians that they can't do things at a time where national unity is in play isn't the way that we build a strong Canada.
Chris Severson-Baker is the Executive Director of the Pembina Institute, a clean energy think tank, and he joins me now. Chris, it's good to see you, sir. Thank you for being here today.
Happy to be here, David.
You've seen the argument, the Prime Minister, the Premier, the Natural Resources and Energy Minister, that for national unity reasons, for economic sovereignty reasons, they say this pipeline is necessary. Does that argument carry the day against the environmental concerns that it creates?
Well, where do we begin? I mean, we've watched as the Prime Minister has rolled back climate legislation, and particularly the most concerning thing was, instead of strengthening the industrial carbon pricing regime, we've actually seen the federal government weaken the industrial carbon pricing regime, and this is what is leading to the Prime Minister coming forth and saying we're really off track in terms of any plan to meet net zero by or some of our interim targets towards net zero by 2050, and so this is the biggest concern, I think, and we're at the same time, I think we're not seeing the kind of investment that we think is necessary to grow to meet net zero in the way that Minister Hodgson talks, which would be through the electrification of the economy, moving away from using fossil fuels, which are expensive and expose Canadians to international prices for natural gas and oil, towards cheaper electricity that we can generate here in Canada. So I think, this is our biggest concern, I think, around, some of the announcements that have happened to date.
When the federal government got behind the idea of this pipeline, it was always, the phrase private sector proponent was always front and center in one of the conditions, along with pathways and carbon capture. This is a private-public partnership, but it's, ironically, the Pembina Pipeline Company, no relation, I assume, that would only have about a 10% stake. Like 90% of this would be public money right now. What does that tell us about the economics of this whole idea of a pipeline to the West Coast, that it requires such a level of government investment and de-risking?
Right. So I think, the Pembina Pipeline has entered into an agreement essentially to make a decision at the 11th hour as to whether or not they want that 10% ownership stake in the pipeline. Up until that point in time, the agreement really only has them playing the role of an advisor on this project. And so I don't consider that to be a private proponent. And I don't think most Canadians, if they really took a look at what Pembina Pipeline has agreed to, would think that that is truly a corporate-led or a private-led project. And so, and I think, I've never felt that this pipeline proposal was viable because there wasn't going to be a private proponent, because there isn't the production of oil that is necessary to fill that pipeline and make it profitable enough for a private entity to go ahead. That's why we were very taken aback when the Prime Minister decided to drop that criteria in the agreement with Alberta, that there had to be a private proponent for this project before it would go ahead.
Well, the lesson, too, of the TMX build, after the federal government stepped in to buy it to resolve sort of the fight between Premiers Horgan and Premiers Notley over it, I mean, it was supposed to be about a $7-8 billion project in round numbers. It was $34 billion at the end. In round numbers, and I know there's some argument of equity versus debt, but it was much more expensive. And there's a limited rate of return because of the regulatory nature of rents on transmission lines. So how convinced are you that this pipeline will even go ahead? Because we spoke with Dennis McConaughey earlier, who worked with TransCanada. He's still skeptical because the production isn't there, as you pointed out, and there's still the carbon price that a lot of oil companies say will be too high by 2040, and the requirement to do pathways. Do you think those all get flattened, or maybe the pipeline just doesn't happen? What's the most likely outcome here?
Well, I mean, so first of all, TMX, it is producing, it is almost full. It's making money, but it's not what you would call an economic success story. I mean, there's still about $32 billion worth of sort of debt to the buyers of this, which was taxpayers, that need to be paid off before we can say that this thing is starting to achieve a positive rate of return. And that's because it was very expensive, and also the tolls that are being charged are high, but they're not high enough to offset the cost of that. A pipeline that follows the same route is going to run into the same technical challenges that the first expansion had. It's not going to be cheap. It's probably going to be even more expensive than the last one. So now, but my concern as an Albertan is that the premier is particularly motivated to find barrels of production to fill this pipeline, and she has a couple of different ways to do that. She can charge really low tolls in the pipeline and outcompete other pipelines, which obviously that wouldn't be a great solution for taxpayers. She can try to get the companies to invest even faster in exploiting the existing approvals that they have. So invest billions of dollars in order to speed up the rate of exploitation of the existing barrels. Companies have shown no interest in doing that. They have their sort of incremental expansion plans, and they're sticking to those plans. Their investors like that approach. And so she would have to put a lot of incentives on the table in order to get them to do that. And that would probably look like royalty holidays, which is just another way that taxpayers would end up footing the bill for that increased production. And then the last way that she could do it is to provide like even more inducements in terms of greenfield operations, right? So even fast tracking of oil sands projects, which again wouldn't be in the best interests of Albertans. And so none of these are particularly good solutions. And I feel like right now, Prime Minister Carney is sort of waiting to see what the premier is able to do in terms of filling the pipeline. But I think it's going to become a problem for the Prime Minister in the long run, just in the same way that the lack of private proponent became a problem for the Prime Minister. And so we may be back in a situation where we're talking about even more financial incentives for the industry to move ahead.
It is remarkable that if you've listened only to the political arguments for the last number of years, the idea that the public sector would step up to take 90% of the cost off a pipeline to the Pacific, that it hasn't led to a stampede of people saying, yeah, we've got barrels to go in that pipeline, because that was sort of the promise here, right? And remains to be seen if it's actually going to get to that level. But we do know, Chris, if it goes ahead, forget 2030, forget 2035. Where does this put Canada on the path to 2050? Because when I've interviewed the Environment Minister, Julie DeBruzen, she keeps saying we're committed to our Paris targets, but then the Prime Minister came out with his video last number of days saying, yeah, we're going to increase emissions over the next number of years. So forget those. What's your view on being a net zero economy? Can the electrification plan and the other things offset moves like this?
Right. So, yeah, the Prime Minister has been pretty direct, not on track to meeting interim targets to achieve on the path to net zero. Claims to be committed to achieving net zero by 2050, but there is no plan. We have no plan in Canada to achieve net zero by 2050 whatsoever. A large reason for this is because instead of strengthening the industrial carbon pricing regime, the Prime Minister has weakened the industrial carbon pricing regime. And it's one of many measures that have been done in order to reduce barriers to the expansion of or the pipeline expansion project. And so, we can at the same time, the Prime Minister is saying a lot of really positive things about the plan to electrify the Canadian economy, which he rightly points out would also address affordability on the path to sustainability, because we don't have a control over the international price of oil. So therefore, our transportation costs are at the whim of that are happening outside of our control. Same thing with natural gas. If we ship more natural gas outside of the country, we no longer have this sort of artificially suppressed price for natural gas in the country as well. And so, but we do have control over electricity prices. We can produce that domestically, taking advantage of cheap renewables, battery storage, the ability to interconnect grids and that sort of thing. And so that is really and also a big opportunity to reduce emissions. It's what the rest of the world is doing, and it sort of brings us full circle back to the reason why the oil sands companies are not interested in committing capital that wouldn't get paid off for 20 or 30 years,
Right.
is because the rest of the world is moving very quickly to move away from using oil for transportation. So electric vehicles are taking off like crazy all over the world. We don't see it as much in Canada because we've kept the lowest cost electric vehicles out of the market until recently. But it's happening, and so that is, that's the main reason why the oil sands industry isn't keen on Daniel Smith's pipeline.
Okay, we've got about 60 seconds left, Chris, then we're going to lose the network. So I'm going to have to ask you to fit the answer into that. But did they have an option but to go down this path with what the U.S. has done with the economic disruption? Like, who knows how long that will last? Who knows how permanent that is? Was there another path they could have taken to sort of hedge against the damage Donald Trump seems intent on doing?
I do understand the challenge of national security, and I do understand what the Prime Minister is trying to do in terms of national unity. But the real option in front of us is to take advantage of the resources that we have that are unmatched in the world around that it would enable us to electrify our economy. Like, there's few countries in the world that have access to every form of power generation that's available, that is low emitting. We can attract a lot of investment. We can fully decarbonize our economy, and we could insulate our economy from more and more over time from the kinds of threats that we're experiencing with our U.S. partner these days.
Yeah, it's the physics of climate change do not care about politics and polling numbers, right? It's going to persist while we figure this all out. Chris Severson-Baker, the Executive Director of the Pembina Institute, appreciate your time, sir. Thanks for being here today.
My pleasure.